Recording. This is the Extraordinary Podcast, and my guest today is just right out of the gate, man. You knew it was gonna happen. This is the Extraordinary Podcast, and my guest today is Schenck.
Nate, excited to be here, man. Excited to see where the conversation goes, and let's see what kind of magic we can make.
Yeah, we're gonna pack a whole lot into this hour. Thanks for taking the time. You said you just got back from Austin, huh?
Yeah, man. So I was there. So I'm a part of a mastermind, and we just met in Austin for about 5 days and did the whole, collaborative, helping each other, hot seats, and all the stuff in between. And so, anytime you do anything like that, when you're working on your own business, you get home and you're like, oh, okay, now I've got 10,000 things I have to do. So it was a great experience, and I'm blessed to be a part of this mastermind. And so we'll see what happens next for me, right?
Yeah. So now it's time to get to work, right?
That's it, man. That's it.
Those things are so much fun, but yeah, you come back with just almost feeling overwhelmed because you have so much to do, so much to get done. And that's been the story of my life this past year, man, just trying to get it all in, man, trying to find the time. But yeah, so for those who don't know, you've got the Growth Now Movement podcast, and you've got some cool events besides the mastermind you're doing. You were doing some live events, and COVID kind of got that a little cattywampus. We talked a little bit about that last time, but yeah, where are you at now? I know you got an event coming up that you're working on, right?
Yeah, man. So I'll just kind of back up a little bit for those who don't know me. Like you said, I host a podcast called The Growth Now Movement. I've been doing that for about 5.5 years now, and 380 plus episodes. So I have to go back and count, somewhere around there, right? 370, 380. And I've been blessed that the show has done well. So the show now gets played in 100 countries every single week and has been downloaded millions of times. And I've been able to interview some of the top people in the world. And really the idea behind the podcast came from, originally, I'll go back a little bit further. Originally, I was like, I want to have a podcast so I can interview entrepreneurs, so I can pick their brain. Because at this point, I had 3 failed businesses, and I was like, I need to learn how to do business better. How do you do that? You ask the experts, right? And I was like, this might be a cool tool to do that. And then what ended up happening was 5 months before I launched the show, my mom lost a 20-year bout of opioids, and she passed away. And it completely shifted my entire perspective about life and what this whole thing means. And so the podcast took a life of its own, and we started talking about overcoming adversity and self-love and how growth happens from the rock bottom moments. And that's really where the conversations went. And that has lent into me, becoming an entrepreneur, speaking on stages all across the country on overcoming adversity, becoming a coach, helping people build their businesses from who they are to really being able to reach the masses, and doing live events where I get to bring in the celebrity speakers that I've had to interview and really create magic. And then, as you know, and now where you started this question after that long description, COVID, right? So COVID happened, and I had to not do the event in 2020. And here we are in 2021. And now there's probably no live event until 2022. We're shooting for May of 2022 at this point. So super excited about that, because I just love bringing people together, right? But we made a shift in 2020. Towards the end of the year, I was like, okay, we need to do something to bring people together. I don't know if the live event's going to happen. And people wanted something from me. And so I decided to partner with my girlfriend and a good friend of mine who is actually a spiritual leader in the entrepreneurial space. And we've put together this incredible 3-day retreat where we were able to deep dive with individuals in what I call the 4 pillars of life: business, wellness, spirituality, and relationships. And how do we level up in all those areas? Because I found this. We all have goals, right? We all have this idea of like, I want to make a ton of money, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. And goals are great because it gives you a direction. The problem with goals is you can say, hey, I want to make $1 million. And I champion those who want to do that and please go make $1 million. But I promise you, when you get to the million, you're immediately going to go, okay, how do I make 10? There's no fulfillment in that. And when you are on your deathbed, which that's all we're chasing right now, right? We all have the end game of we're all going to die. And so when we're on that deathbed, are we going to say, wow, I'm so glad I made those millions? Or we're going to say, I felt fulfilled in my relationships. I'm so glad I stayed healthy so I could live a long time. I created success and impacted my business, which is great, right? And of course, spirituality, I connected with spirituality on a deep level, however you look at spirituality. And that's where fulfillment comes from. And I believe that's the goal for most people. They just never knew how to define it because the world tells them who they should be versus them telling themselves who they are. And so when we find that fulfillment, it's amazing. And so that's where the retreats came from. We have another one coming up in October in New Orleans. Super stoked about that. And so, yeah, I mean, that was my whole entire journey, my whole entire story dumped into about 5 minutes. And now we can go in any direction you want to from there.
Well, no, that's fantastic because what you just encapsulated in that little bit there was exactly where we are with the mission that we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do with this podcast. And we had spoken before. Unfortunately, the audience hasn't got to hear any of that, but I was just talking about how aligned your vision is with what my vision ultimately is, and how you're just a little bit further down that path of where I ultimately hope to go. And so to have you as kind of like this example, of kind of, okay, like if I'm at step C and you're at step like M or P or Q or down
Yeah.
that, but it's like, all right, well, I can see that's where I get to go. That's the process to follow it. And to see continually, like what I find really neat is like when you first started your podcast, it really wasn't conceptualized in the manner into all this life fulfillment stuff. It's all about business and success and like all those things that we all initially strive for: the money, the
Mhm.
fame, the fortune, all that kind of stuff. And then, but what I think is so beautiful about what your podcast has evolved into, and what I love, the journey that so many people go down, is that when you start to strive for that success, like you said, it's good to have that goal. You begin to realize that the goal changes, the goal shifts. It does what you thought was super important isn't necessarily as important, but and these new things begin to emerge, and you get this more holistic, more well-rounded approach to life in general. And to watch you go through that journey and to see the podcast go through that journey is just really, really cool.
Yeah, man. And I'm so glad you brought that up because honestly, when this show took off, I was in one of the worst spots in my life, right? Like my favorite person just passed away and it was unexpected, which was my mom. And I went on this journey of trying to figure out who I was and how do I live my life the best I can and how do I find self-love because I didn't have it. And so a lot of the beginning of the podcast, I'd say the first 2 years of the podcast, that was all for me. Like those conversations were for me. And actually, if you go back, I don't always recommend it because when I first started, I was really bad at it. But when you go back and pay attention, you'll notice like clumps of different types of experts, right? Like there'll be like a wellness expert like four times in a row, or there'll be like a relationship expert a couple times in a row. And you can go, okay, Justin was struggling with that at that moment. Because I purposely would reach out to these experts. So like, I have this tool that I can interview pretty much anybody, right? And what ended up happening was I started to implement the things that I learned, and I was able to then grow the successful business. I was able to then get the right relationships in my life. I was able to then get better with my wellness and connect with my spirituality because I put in the work. And so as the show grew, sometimes it's still for me, but a lot of times it's, hey, what does my audience want? And we're all on this journey together, right? I've found, and look, I'm friends with people who are worth $500 million. What we would claim to be the greatest success. There's got to be contentment and fulfillment in that. But the reality is we all have limiting beliefs on some level. Their limiting beliefs are just higher up. Like you said, I'm at M, you're at C, right? You see that. You see this. And one thing that I've always done is find the master, follow the model. Find the master, follow the model, hire the coach that can help get you there, right? So like a lot of what I'm doing is in 2021 is I have a big focus on creating a large passive income for myself, that I'm not doing much work to handle that. I was never an expert in that. I've always been paid to be me, my time minute per minute, which I still do with coaching and speaking. But I was like, how do I scale this? How do I keep teaching people and all this stuff? So I hired a coach that is an expert in passive income. He also is an expert in utilizing live events at a higher level than I was before. So that's happening too. But that was a big thing for me of, I want to create that passive income. And so, yes, we all get uncomfortable. We all have limiting beliefs. We all have these things. And here's what I've realized about limiting beliefs. Again, going back to, we all have them. And usually, and it's funny because you talk about the 4 pillars, it usually falls in one of those 4 pillars. My limiting belief is I'm not lovable enough that somebody would want to be with me, right? That's a relationship one. Or I'm not good looking enough that somebody would want to love me. Or I'm just not healthy enough. I'm not, like, I had one in the beginning of the year of, I'm not an athlete. I could never be an athlete. And how do you overcome those limiting beliefs? And I'll share that story here in a second, but there's a process that I've developed that will help you overcome literally every single limiting belief. And it's super simple, but it's not easy, right? But anything worthwhile is not easy, but the steps are super, super simple. Number 1, get uncomfortable. You have to get uncomfortable in order to move forward. What's that mean? Stretch yourself financially, quit the job, end the relationship that's unhealthy. Get outside of your comfort zone, work out harder than you've ever worked out before. Get uncomfortable. Somebody says, I'm not a good meditator. Cool. Find a way to meditate for 20 minutes straight every single day. Get uncomfortable. Step 2, surround yourself with the right people. That could be a collection of individuals in a mastermind. It could be the right coach. It could be your significant other, but you want to surround yourself with the right people to help you get to that next level. And number 3, take action. Nothing happens without action. Nothing changes if you don't change. So you have to take action. So those are the 3 simple steps in order to overcome any limiting belief. Again, simple, but not easy. And so I'll put it into context with my own life. When I look at the 4 pillars, I was like, okay, cool. I've mastered 3 of them. Business, got it. Relationships, healthy. Spirituality, real deeply connected. And I'm still on that journey, but still very deeply connected spiritually. Number 4, wellness. My whole entire life, I was a yo-yo dieter. Lose weight, gain weight, lose weight, gain weight, lose weight, gain weight. Like so many people in the world. And I was like, why can't I figure this out? Why do I keep losing the weight and then I self-sabotage and I gain it right back? What's going on? Clearly there's something internally. And so at the end of 2020, I did a deep dive into my life and I was like, where is this coming from? And I realized that when I was 12 years old, I broke my hip. And my doctor said to me, well, buddy, you're never going to be an athlete. And he didn't mean it in any negative way. He was just saying, you're not going to play sports. But I internalized that in my head to say, I'm not good enough to be physically fit. I can never be an athlete. And so in the beginning of this year, and I think this might be the first conversation we ever had. We talked about this, I think. I did 75 hard. And so I committed to do this thing for 75 days. And so what did I do? I got uncomfortable. Never before in my life have I been able to do all these things on the checklist for 75 days straight. And for those who don't know, it's created by a guy named Andy Frisella, where you work out twice a day, 45 minutes each, work out 1 outside. By the way, I live in Pennsylvania. It's a little cold in January and February. You do a gallon of water, 10 pages of self-help book, progress photo, no cheat meals, no alcohol. So I got uncomfortable and I decided this is what I'm going to do. I publicly proclaimed it on my podcast. This is what I'm doing. And then I surrounded myself with the right people. My girlfriend came along with me. She did the journey with me, which helped immensely. And number 3, I took action. I went and I crushed it. I killed 75 hard. I mean, there's people failing all over and I get why they failed. But I can say my first attempt, I crushed it. And so those were the 3 things that I was like, okay, cool. It's the model, right? It's how I do everything. And now it's funny. Day 1, I said to my girlfriend, I was like, babe, I'm an athlete. And she goes, yeah, you are. That's how you know you're surrounding yourself with the right people. And so I've really overcame this obstacle of like, why can't I figure this out? And so that's really the art of overcoming those limiting beliefs and understanding that no matter where we are, there's always going to be a limiting belief. It just may be at a higher level.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I like how you were able to leverage the podcast to kind of get your job. I think for so many of us, like this podcast, we start off as, using it to develop business principles or ideas and all that, but it ends up becoming such a helpful tool for ourselves. And it helps us to evolve and to grow. And it becomes almost selfish in that way. But the 75 Hard program is an amazing program. My folks are actually in the middle of doing it right now.
Nice.
It's anything that kind of, like you said, gets you out of your comfort zone. That's an amazing thing. So tell me about the guests that you get, because you've been blessed with some really amazing opportunities to speak with some really cool people. And I mean, some celebrity, but I mean, I always find more interest in the ones that have just been successful and demonstrate a lot of the principles that you and I believe in. So how do you go about finding them and what's your process there?
Yeah. So it's funny. People ask me all the time, like, how do you decide who to bring on your show? A lot of the time it's just people I have admired from afar, like people that I've seen their success and their track record. And I've heard, at least through the grapevine or whatever, that they're just good human beings. And so that's kind of my vetting process. Are you a good human being that I admire what you're doing? And I've been kind of a fan in a way. Like I've talked to people often that I'm like a fan of, right? Like last week I interviewed Joel Freeman. His workouts are the ones I did through 75 Hard. And I interviewed Ricky Williams, who, for me, that was a surreal moment. So if you don't know who he is, he was a Heisman Trophy winner, Pro Bowler.
But dealt honestly, with a lot of mental health issue stuff.
Yeah, mental health, and obviously he's a bunch of other things too. But I enjoyed the fact that he's a yogi. I enjoyed the fact that he's an astrologer now. Like he's completely flipped his life. It's so crazy. Loved the conversation with him. But with that being said, how do I go about the process? It's actually really simple. I think a lot of times we overthink things, or we don't think that we're good enough, right? Those limiting beliefs of like, oh, they wouldn't come on my show, so you don't even reach out. Honestly, those 2 guys I just mentioned, I messaged them on Instagram. And I said, hey, I've got this podcast. I think you'd be a phenomenal guest. And I realized that they're both people with a message to change the world. And those are a lot of times the people that I reach out to. Entrepreneurs like Ed Milet, right? Worth $500 million. He's been on the show and has become a friend of mine. But it was just a cold reach out. Hey man, I'd be interested in having you on the show.
Nice.
And honestly, I tell them my mission in a way. And at the end I say, I'd be really honored if you'd come on and spare a couple minutes of your time to inspire my audience. And so that's really the key of like, we're on the same path. We're on the same wavelength, and we're moving forward together. And look, these people who have made it, quote unquote, made it, they want to give back. And the easiest way for them to give back is to inspire and share their story.
I was hoping you were going to give that tagline, because when you were on our buddy Jeremy Siegel, or Jeremy, what you call it? Oh my goodness, I'm terrible.
Mastermind thing that he does.
Yeah, Jeremy. Why am I saying Siegel? Is that his last name? Am I screwing that up?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's how you say it. I know how it's spelled. I just don't know how to say it.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. So, when you were on Jeremy Siegel's, we're going to be doing a little editing here, obviously. Anyway, I was hoping you were going to use that tagline, because when you were on his show and you were sharing with us in that little mastermind group, that was the first takeaway that I stole from you, and I implemented into all of my requests that I reach out to guests. Is that inspire my audience was it just rung true to me, and I've used it ever since.
Dude, really quick, and we can move to the next question, but I really like what you just said about it. It rung true to me. Here's the thing. We all admire people in the world, right? Like we all look up to somebody and be like, oh my God, like that'd be cool to be like that, whether it be a Gary Vee or a Joe Rogan or whoever. We look up to people, but you're not those people. And people are going to see right through you if you try and be them. So if you saying something to a potential guest of like, hey, I would love it if you came on to inspire my audience, but that has nothing to do with your message or who you are, what you're really trying to do, please don't use that.
All right.
But if you are that person, use that, because then it rings true, right? And so it's really about being authentically yourself, and then getting their attention that way, right? And I think that is that's really the importance of life, is like, how do you get what you want? Be authentically yourself and do the work. And so if your show is about drinking beer, don't say come inspire my audience, because clearly the two don't align. And look, I drink beer.
Inspire
I like
my
beer.
audience to drink beer.
That's well, you could say that, right? Like, I mean, I've had Zane Lamprey on my show, who's a comedian, but he used to host the show Three Sheets. And fun fact, I've never drank while I was doing an interview before, and Zane was going to come on the show, and I was like, should I have a beer? Because he's the drink guy. He's the beer drinking guy. And he travels the world and does all the things. And he came on the show and we did the interview. I didn't have a beer with me. He came on the show. We did the interview and he goes, hey man, afterwards, he's like, hey man, thank you so much for not drinking a beer while we're doing this, or asking me to have a beer with you. Like, thank you for being you. And I was like, whoa, I didn't say this to him, but I'm like, I actually thought about having a beer. And so I was so glad that I was just myself, and I approached it in the way that I would approach things. And that really stuck. And he ended up introducing me to Bert Kreischer, who is one of the world's top comedians. He's actually off filming his first feature film. Yeah. Thanks, man. It was that was a lot of fun. It was one of my longest ones too. But yeah, that's really the thing of like being authentically yourself.
Oh, I love that. I think that's a great. I always encourage people to steal ideas from other people, and to get things that are helping you down your road. But because when you do that, even if you're trying to imitate someone, you're automatically your own personality is gonna come out in that. So like, no matter how much you try to be like a Gary Vee, you'll never be a Gary Vee. Your own personality is going to come into that. So if Gary Vee's message is in alignment with yours, then stick with the message and steal as much as you want, because your natural flamboyance, your natural personality is going to come out through the process. Again, the same thing with the podcast. I think with these podcasts, our personalities naturally just come out. Like they reveal themselves, if you will. So I'm curious, again, because you're on this cool podcasting journey, just like I am. And again, one of the things you talked about in other interviews is that kind of that exponential growth. We all, as podcasters and as social media folks or whatever, I'm not going to use the word influencers, but we all kind of, because I hate that word, but we all,
me too.
we all hope for this, like this growth, this trajectory of growth. But you talked about how it's like it's nothing, and then it can launch, it can kind of take off. When was that aha moment for you with the podcast? Or did you have a time where like things kind of like clicked? You're like, okay, this thing is happening. Was it with the Inc. magazine interview, anything like that? Was there a moment in time where you were like, it shifted from one thing into something else?
Yeah, I think there's two moments that I noticed this. So when I started my podcast journey, I actually had a co-host for the first 64 episodes or something like that. So I had a co-host, and we then took a brief break, like about a month and a half break from doing the show. And during that time, I asked him to take a step back. And so the first moment of realizing like, okay, this is different is when I relaunched by myself. Now the name has always been the same, so you can still go back and listen to those episodes actually. But I realized that when I became authentically myself and my message matched everything that I was branded on, everything that I was trying to pursue, everything that I was trying to do, I realized there was subtle growth. And I was like, oh, whoa, now I just went from 60 to 150 people. Then I went from 150 to 500. And then I went to, you know what I mean? And I was like, okay, wow, there's growth happening here. And I realized when I went back and did some research as far as like, why is this happening? I realized that it was the fact that our messaging was very cloudy. Right. And so I went and looked at other podcasts and started doing some research. And I realized the ones that were successful is that their branding matched every single thing they were saying in the show. So it was real. A lot of times with podcasts, the branding doesn't match. Like, oh, you find a show and it's branded as something, and you go listen, you go, they're not even talking about the thing they say they're talking about. This doesn't make sense. And so that was my first moment of like, okay, this is how we grow. We just authentically be ourselves, and we pour into what our passion and our purpose is. The second one was the Inc. magazine article. That was the exponential leap, right? And so when I got, so what people, if people don't know, I was listed by Inc. magazine as a top 8 podcast every entrepreneur should follow. I was on the list with people like Andy Frisella and Lewis Howes and John Lee Dumas. And there was this random guy from Reading, Pennsylvania on this list. And I was actually number 2 on the list, which is crazy. And overnight my life changed. People started messaging me, and social media blew up, and, I gained some followers, and I was like, wow, this went from this side hustle thing to this could be real. And the big thing that I learned there when it comes to exponential growth is nobody does anything alone. Nobody is a self-made anything. And I steal this from my friend Fabio Viviani, who from America's Top Chef, an incredible entrepreneur in his own right. He came on my show, and he's been a keynote speaker at my event, and he's a good friend of mine now. But when he came on the show, he goes, look, there's no self-made, or no, he talked about being a self-made millionaire, right? He's like, there's these self-made millionaires, but they've had help along the way. And he goes, but there's also self-made losers, right? It's people who make these decisions. But I realized that whether you're a loser or you're a winner or you're a whatever, you're not truly self-made. Here's why. In order to level up in life, period, you have to surround yourself with the right people. And so therefore, if you're surrounding yourself with the right people and then you start leveling up, you're not doing it alone. And so when I put myself in the company, I didn't put myself in the Inc. article, somebody else did. But when I was put into the company of those individuals, it gave me a foot up. And so what I would say to people is like, yeah, Justin, well, not everybody's going to be put on this top 8 Inc. article that got read by 180,000 people. And I go, you're 100% right. But every single person can get in the room with the right people and position themselves in the right way in order to go to the next level. And so those are really the two moments of, number one, understanding, does your messaging align with who you are and your purpose? And number two, are you surrounding yourself with the right people in order to be placed in a certain list or whatever? And so anybody who understands the entrepreneur game, I did not buy that spot in the Inc. magazine article. A lot of times you can buy placement in things like Inc. magazine and entrepreneur.com. And you can do that, but I did not do that. I didn't even know that you could do that back then. But
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Huh. And so I woke up one day and everything changed. And I realized that when you get put into company with other people, it can give you an opportunity to be seen. But you better be ready for that. You better be ready, because I do know people that were on that list personally who it didn't really help their brand because they weren't ready for it. So you have to be ready for when that moment comes.
So when it did come, how did you leverage that? How did you take advantage?
So I'll say this: number one, I was ready because I got really good at my craft. I got good at being a podcast interviewer. So when people found my show, they stuck around. And so overnight, it was about a 4x growth in my show. And all of a sudden,
Wow.
thousands of people were listening, and I was like, this is crazy. And so people started reaching out, and I essentially was just myself, right? So I was ready and I was just myself. I didn't try and be anybody else. I didn't do any of that stuff. But it's also, I mean, if we talk business, if you want business tactics, I leverage it on everything I did. It went on my website. It's still on every single bio that I have. It's still the first thing mentioned. It got me speaking engagements. It got me paid speaking engagements because I was like, no, I've been on Inc. magazine, right? It gave me a sense of I had worth. So I had worth before, but it gave me this level up in my worth of like, how much am I worth? And so it became my negotiating chip. Right. And a lot of times people just go, oh yeah, this thing just happened. And they try and pass it off as like, whatever. No, man, I'm blessed and honored. But I also worked my butt off to get it. So I'm going to wear it as a badge of honor. And I still do to this day. I mean, it's still one of the, and I've been featured on a lot of other cool places like Thrive Global and all these other neat places now. But that thing is still my badge of honor. It was the first thing. It was the biggest thing. And from that standpoint, I carried it with me, man. And a lot of people just kind of sweep it under the rug. But from a business tactical standpoint, you need to put that everywhere. That levels you up and puts you in any room you want to be in.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's all marketing is such a big aspect of this now. And the marketing game has changed so much with social media. I'm always curious how to, number one, market and then to leverage opportunities like that, leverage things that do pop up. I had opportunities to speak at podcast or PodFest and trying to understand like how to market that and leverage it and to take advantage of every opportunity. Because like you said, being in the right place, right time, being prepared, that's such a huge aspect of it. You have a program to help people start to launch their podcast or help people to get into this, because podcasting ultimately is a marketing tool for all of us. And I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of like the nuts and bolts of that, but most people that are starting podcasts today, like you and I, are doing an interview based format, something similar to this. What are some of the common mistakes you see in interview format based podcasts? And what would be some of the tips or tricks that you, because obviously you're a very polished interviewer at this point, what would be some of those tips and tricks that you would recommend to somebody like me to be a better interviewer?
Yeah. Just a number of mistakes. Number one, under preparation, just not being fully prepared for the interview. Like I've gone a lot of time, every single time I share my story, I talk about that beginning point of like my mom passing away. I've been interviewed by people who go, wow, I didn't know that. I'm like, okay, well, clearly you did very minimal to no research, which is fine if you know how to kind of navigate certain conversations, but most people aren't expert conversationalists. So don't under prepare. The second mistake is over preparation. Over preparation gets you stuck. And here's what I mean. If you over prepare for an interview, you find out that you end up not creating your own style of interview. You end up creating other styles of interviews that you've listened to or over listened to, or you purposely are so enamored with trying to get it to one focal point in the conversation that you can't flow within the conversation. So those are for the two don't do's. Number three, this is a must do, be flexible. Listen to the conversation that's happening and wait for golden nuggets, right? Be that active listener of like, wow, they said that, make a mental note. I want to go back to that. Because a lot of times what happens is you get so stuck, again, being on that focal point, that you miss the good parts of the conversation. I actually have a dear friend. I won't put him on blast. He's a podcaster. His show does very, very well. And he interviewed Sean Merriman, who's an NFL player. And Sean's talking about his life. And he's like, yeah, and he mentioned some really sad story, which was a pivotal moment in his life about his mom. And the next question, my friend Jeremy, I just put him on blast. The next question, my friend, here he is. The next question, my friend. That was great. So the next question my friend asks is, tell me more about the workout preparation you do when you're in college to get ready for the NFL. And I'm like, that is what I mean. Like you had a direction you wanted to go, but you didn't allow yourself to flow into another direction. And so,
or he had a direction that he was willing to go, and you didn't allow him that opportunity, man.
Right. You
Oh,
could tell he
great
wanted. You
point,
could tell
man.
he wanted to talk about it, and so those are the two don't do's. Third must do is be flexible, and then I'd also say just be yourself. Don't try and be Joe Rogan. Don't try and be whatever. Like I've been asked to be on podcasts, and I'm like, cool. And they'll be like, oh, awesome. Just so you know, we have a Joe Rogan flow. I'm like, that's weird. I'm like, you're not
What does
Joe
that
Rogan.
even mean
Yeah,
anyway? Like,
what does that even mean? And I was like, and I actually replied to the guy. I was like, hey, really honored to be on the show, man. I'm just hoping it's not 4 hours. Because Joe Rogan's go that like I'm like, I don't have that kind of time in my day. And so that is that, just be true to yourself. And I think those are the four things. And honestly, it's like anything else. It's like a muscle, right? The more you do it, the better you get, the more comfortable you get, all that stuff. And so I would just say repetition, be consistent, do those things, and you'll get better over time.
so with that said, public speaking is something that really comes with the reps. You get really good at it when you put the reps in. You've been blessed with some amazing opportunities, even with your own events, obviously getting to speak there as well. Advice on that, getting those reps, getting those opportunities, because that's one of the things I'm always trying to do is to look for more opportunities to share my message and to get that out there. Any advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, more than anything, just don't be afraid to ask for the opportunity. A lot of times, you're going to have to start out speaking for free, paying your own tickets, paying your own way. But that's really how you get the reps in. I get paid now, which is super nice. But I still do some stuff for free. Like if I know who the audience is, or it makes sense, or if it's a buddy of mine who's doing an event, I'll show up for free. But honestly, I think I'm not the best at giving advice to how to get booked as a speaker, and the reason is because of what I've built with the podcast, people reach out to me and say, hey, are you able to speak? Do you speak?
They're looking for you.
Yeah. And so actually I just had a conversation yesterday, a guy coming on my show in a couple of weeks who is a speaker. And I was like, yeah, man, you know what? I was speaking about once or twice a month before COVID, flying all over the country and speaking at events and stuff like that. But I never really put in the reps or put in the work. And once the world opens back up, I think I will. So maybe at that point, invite me back on the show and I'll tell you what I did. But more than anything, man, it's really saying yes to even the free stuff, saying yes, and then leveraging it. And so what I mean by that is make sure you have a friend there who takes quality photos of you speaking. If they have a professional photographer or videographer, grab that if you can. And then repurposing that on social media in a way where people go, wow, he speaks. And then all of a sudden they go, hey, are you willing to speak? Like, for instance, I spoke in Montana, probably about 6 months before COVID. And I was the keynote at their statewide young professionals event. And the reason being is because 5 years ago, I met somebody, they followed me on social media and she goes, hey, I know you speak. Are you willing to come and talk about your journey? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And they paid me well and they paid for my travel and they did all these things. And so it was one of those moments of like, okay, cool. Amazing. I'm just going to keep putting in those reps. And so that's how it happens. You have to let people know you're doing it. People think that like, they're just going to like be all quiet and shy. And then somebody's going to come up and say, hey, you should speak at my event. It doesn't work that way. You got to let people know that that's one of your superpowers.
Biggest difference between putting in the reps as a podcaster, public speaking, versus being on a stage?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think, podcasting is easier, right? If you really want to, you can do an interview every single day. So it's a lot easier to sit down behind the mic and do it. The difference between the two more than anything is like when I'm public speaking, I feed off the audience. So it's hard for me to give the same type of energy virtually that I do in person because I feed off the energy. But it's harder to stay consistent because people will say things to you while you're speaking. You always have those people in the audience that'll start talking. And like with this right now, like this is just me and you. You know when I'm talking, you're not talking. I know when you're talking, I'm not talking. When you're in front of a crowd, like people are going to say stuff. And I'll share something with you. This was actually a Podfest. I think it was the 2 Podfests ago, not the last one they did live, but the one they did live before that. And I was one of the breakout speakers, and I was blessed to be I was the number 1 attended breakout session of the whole entire thing, which was really cool. And awesome. My buddy introduced me, and he's got a health podcast. And I started talking about podcasting, and this guy was one of my clients. And I talked about how, he has now a top podcast in health. And I go, obviously I don't have a top podcast in health. And at the time I was very, very physically not fit. And I go, I don't have abs. And some random woman shot it from the back. Prove it. And so that's live speaking versus podcasting. How do you react to that? What are you doing? But feeding off of that, right? Like allowing yourself to go in certain directions to help build your portfolio.
I didn't even think about hecklers.
No, dude, it was actually really funny. I go, yeah, that's not happening. Sorry. And people started laughing. But yeah, it was one of those things that, like, I mean, there's just a different feel to it. So if you're getting the reps in podcasting, you're not getting them in public speaking. Like, it's two different things. One helps the other a little bit, might help you find topics, might help you find your flow, or you're comfortable, how comfortable you are speaking. Yeah. Your message, all that stuff.
And all that.
But once you get in front of an audience of 1,000 people, could you do it? Could it be the same flow? Could you understand the power of that? Like, it's a big difference. So I'd say, I mean, you still got to get the reps in on both ends.
Well, and now it's kind of morphed into this thing where we're doing our public speaking in this format, in this virtual world. And there's become this whole new nuance and sophistication to virtual public speaking. So what are some of the tips and tricks for these virtual opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I've hosted 2 virtual events. I've presented at multiple virtual events, and some live Zoom, like I could see the people. Some were like my virtual events, I couldn't see the people watching. I could just read their comments. And then one was a pre-recorded thing. And so, yeah, and the pre-recorded thing was it was literally a 25-minute talk that took me 2.5 hours to record because I kept messing up. And so like the perfection of it, and like not having anybody see me and all this stuff. So I think more than anything,
worse, right? When you have that window to work with, it almost makes it worse.
I have a hard time. I'm my hardest judge. And so I have a hard time virtually because I can't feed off the energy of the audience. So I don't know if they're liking it, if they're not liking it. So sometimes I get in my own head. And so I would just say preparation is probably key virtually, like understanding what are you trying to present here, like, and prepare it properly. Don't try and free flow. Free flowing is a little bit easier in person just because, again, you kind of get what they need. You're not getting any of that virtually. Yeah. You're not getting any of that virtually. So that's the biggest difference. So I would say over prepare virtually, because that way, at least, hey, this information I'm about to present to you is priceless. So get ready to take some notes or whatever you say. Right. So that's what I would recommend from a virtual standpoint.
How about trying to do, you've done the live events and now you're doing the virtual events. It's something I aspire to do. I understand the necessity of virtual events now, but I really, really, really want to get to an in-person event. I really want to do something here in Atlanta. I think we've got just this incredible synergy. I think with everything going on with the movies and Netflix and everything in Atlanta and the social media presence that's going on here. Give me some advice, or like, how would you recommend me getting that first event going, or what's the process to move in that direction? Yeah,
dude, it's a lot. I mean, a live event,
I know it.
A live event is such a labor of love. Unless you have the right people coaching you, a lot of times you lose money the first time. I got lucky the first time and I made money, but like I got real lucky.
I'm assuming I'm going to lose money on the first one.
So I would say this, put feelers out there before you take any action to find out if it's needed or wanted. I had about 10 people say, yeah, I'd buy a ticket to that beforehand. I reached out to some of the speakers and they're like, yeah, let me know more details as you get closer, but I'm in. So whenever you're ready. And so I prepared a couple things before I made any announcements. That way I knew people were coming, right? Even if it was only 10. And then I also knew the speakers that would be willing to do it, even if there were 10 people in the audience. And so for me, I would say, don't announce it and then do the work, then announce it. That's going to be my biggest tip for you, because everything else is logistically different, right? You're in Atlanta, you have a ton of different venues. I do mine in Reading, Pennsylvania. There's like 4. And so, you could be super flexible, find ways at certain moments. If you don't want to lose money, find ways to negotiate down, make trades. Say, hey, if you'll do, I'll give you sponsorship if you give me this or whatever. And you'll be able to kind of work around all that.
Do you recommend kind of starting off as like creating a small group and doing some kind of like a little group dynamic and then like seeing that build? Or do you recommend it being like, because like I always refer back to PodFest. I mean, that's kind of like my model, because and Growth Now Movement as well, as kind of like the model. And even like with Chris, and he kind of started off with doing some group stuff first.
Yeah.
Is that a better approach to kind of like build community first, or do you think just go for it?
I think building community first is a no-brainer. I built a community through podcasting. right? And so if you need to do other tactics, whether it's like, hey, we're going to have a small gathering, a small meetup of 10 people at first and then grow from there. Cool. Understand that it doesn't have to be done overnight. And, Chris is a fun example because what people don't really know about Chris is that he actually owned a company before he was running Podfest, where they did over 3,000 live events. The guy's the master of live events, and him and I have become good friends off the basis of we're both event planners, even though that's a small portion of what I do. And so he understands the pain that you go through of
and
doing
suffering,
it.
right?
Yeah. So, but yes, to answer your question, build community first. However that is, right? Whether it's through meetups or Zoom groups or whatever. Like, who could actually probably start a killer live event? Jeremy
Well, that's
could
who
probably
I'm hoping to kind of partner with, because he's here in Atlanta, and the meetup, that you were on when y'all did the podcast and all that actually originally started off as an in-person thing here in Atlanta. Where they were all getting together. And then obviously COVID hit, that forced it into this virtual thing, which is cool because it's morphed into something different and something that it's its own little thing. But in the process of doing that, we lost this little in-person live, local, and Atlanta is just such a hub for it. I feel like Jeremy would be a huge asset if I could get him on board. I think that would really make it happen.
And there's not a ton of at least in my world, there's not a ton of stuff that happens in Atlanta. I've never been to Atlanta. I'd love to go to Atlanta. I have friends in Atlanta. So, hey, if you need a speaker,
guess who's speaking at my first event?
You let me know, man. I'll be there.
Right? Yeah, that would be amazing. Well, I mean, again, with your vision and in such alignment with what we're doing, I've been dying for this conversation for forever, because there's just so much of what you're doing that just makes sense to me, that just aligns with what I want to do. And it's pretty incredible. Any other advice you'd give? Any other mistakes that you've kind of made along the way that you can help me to look out for, to avoid, or as I'm trying to catch up to you?
I mean, I think the main thing is, man, honestly, mistakes are important to have. Like, people look at them like, and they beat themselves up. And I know this is a pretty cliche thing to say, but the mistakes are the reason I've been able to do what I'm doing. Like, I mean, there's part of my journey I didn't share. I mean, 10 years ago, I owned a business that I put together seminars and expos and failed miserably. And so failure is always a part of the journey, but make sure you learn from it. And I'll share this with you. And this will be like my parting words of wisdom. And I'm kind of glad it came to this. So people ask me all the time, like, what's the best advice you ever received? And it goes in line with what I just said to you about mistakes being important. And it goes back to that story of 10 years ago. So I owned a company for about 1.5 years, which was a side hustle to what my actual day job. But we put together seminars and expos that focused on personal and professional growth. And we started small and we built up over time. And we did like a big nonprofit expo that was successful. And then we're like, hey, we're going to do a business expo. And we paid a speaker a ton of money to come. We spent a lot of money on marketing. We literally took everything we had made in the company over the last 1.5 years and put it into this event. We're like, this is it. We're going to quadruple our money. We're going to be good. We're going to be able to quit our jobs. We're going to do this full time. And we sold 3 tickets to the event. Fun fact about that, little fun fact of those 3 tickets, they were sold through Groupon. And if you know how Groupon works, you have to cut your price in half. And then you only get half of that. So we made no money and we shut the doors on our business. And I called my mom and I told her, I was like 24 years old at the time. I'm 36 now. So wow, it was like 12 years ago. I called my mom and I said, hey, we decided to shut the doors of the company. And she's like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But she said, here's what's important. You're headed in the right direction. Keep your head up and keep moving forward. And I learned so many mistakes that I had done back then. I learned from so many of those mistakes. And I realized that no matter how many times I failed, no matter how many times the bank account read 0, no matter how many times all this stuff happens, I kept my head up and I kept moving forward because I was headed in the right direction. And I think that's the best advice for anybody. Like, try really hard, but if you fail, it's okay. Get up and try again, right? Try harder, as they say, or fail more, fail harder, fail forward, whatever.
Fail forward is one of our taglines.
Yeah, fail forward, right?
Fail your way forward.
I love it, man. And honestly, that was I didn't realize it at the time when I was 24. It was just my mom saying something to her son, and I'm sure that's what it was, but it was really life-changing stuff. And when I gave the eulogy at her funeral, I left the people that attended with that same word and that same message. And, even though she's not with us anymore, the message from her is keep your head up and keep moving forward, because that's what she would want. And so anybody who has a loved one, even if they're still here, they want you to keep moving forward. So keep your head up and keep moving forward. So, I mean, that's the greatest advice I can give anybody.
That's a beautiful note. That's a great note to end on, man. All right. So tell folks where they can find you. Tell folks where they can find out more about these events coming up and all
Yeah,
that.
man, the best place, honestly, the best place to go, they can, wherever they're listening to this show, they can go find the Growth Now movement. They can find me there. Instagram's a good spot. That's my favorite place to hang out, at Justin T. Schenck. And then if they're interested in the retreats, they can message me. There's actually not even a website about it because it's invite only. But there's a website about it. And if they're interested in anything else, just shoot me a message. We'll get in touch.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited for that event in New Orleans. That's going to be really cool. And I may have a resource for you out there. My brother-in-law, his sister's the first executive chef at Commander's Palace.
Oh,
there.
nice.
So
That's good to know, man.
I don't know if we can get any hookups, but hey, it's worth, again, like you said, stick your neck out there and make the ask, and you never know what might happen from it. So
that's it, man. Absolutely.
Well, Justin, thanks for your time, man. Really good. There's so much more that I really want to get into with you, and obviously we just barely scratched the surface. And I hope that this will be the beginning of a beautiful relationship that we can continue to grow with. Last two questions I like to wrap up my interviews with, and we kind of already covered it. My billboard question with what you just ended with, so we can skip that one if you want to. But no, it's beautiful. You wrapped it tied it in a nice little bow and wrapped it up nicely for me. It's beautiful. Clearly,
been podcasting for too long, man.
Clearly, you've done this once or twice before, right? No, but so my last two questions are: if you had a billboard for all the world to see, what would you put on it? And then the last but not least, kind of fun, off the wall. What's your favorite item under $100 that you could not live without that you use on like an everyday basis?
Damn. So actually, I don't know if that message would be on my billboard. I think my billboard would say, "You are enough, just as you are." I think we strive too much to be something other than who we are, and because we're told that we're not enough, right? One of my favorite quotes is, "Who were you before the world told you who you should be?" And I think that's massive. So that's my billboard, right? And then my favorite thing under $100 that I can't live without. This is so hard for me, man, because I'm kind of a minimalist. I don't have a lot of stuff, but here's what I'll say. And this is funny. We're talking about self-development, but the fun thing about me is like, what wouldn't I sacrifice in order to live my life? And there's a lot of things, but the one thing is cigars. And so I have a $40 cigar cutter, which I have right here in my hand, that I will never, I can't live without. And so that is my one thing, my $40 cigar cutter. Fun fact, actually, my girlfriend bought this for me. And I then lost it. And so this is the one I bought myself because it's such a good cigar cutter. And I enjoy the V cut. If anybody's a cigar smoker that listens to this, I like the V cut, and that's what this is. But that's it.
You didn't just rat yourself out, did you, to your girlfriend? Now she got to hear this episode.
Oh no, she knows.
Okay,
she knows. Yeah.
Full disclosure.
Because I had to ask her where she bought it.
I was just saying, is there a brand? Is there a particular place they need to go to find this thing? Or
I believe I bought it on Amazon, and it's Colibri, and it's cool. Like it's got a little button you push, it opens it up, and it's just, dude, I love it.
And it's the V cut. That's the key.
The V cut, man. Yep.
Well, there you go. I've never had that answer before. That's a great one. I love it, man. Well, Justin, hey, man, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for your time today, and looking forward to where the future takes you and us. And yeah, man, so many good things ahead. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, man. I look forward to our next conversation.
All right, brother. We'll talk to you soon.